Very good. I wanted to welcome Jake Jordan, a good friend of mine, to the stage. I've known Jake's family a very long time. I went to college with your dad and your mom. I was in their wedding, in fact. And it was funny, as you went to college, and I had one son, four girls. Reagan is your age, I believe, correct? Yeah. And so I remember Reagan coming home and telling me, I think it was her second semester freshman year, that Jake was not going to be attending the University of Kansas anymore. And I don't have to tell you, Kansas City, if you haven't figured out, is one of the bigger small towns in this country. And this kind of reverberates through town, like, oh, you know, like, I knew your grandfather and both sides. Oh, yeah. Big businessman in Kansas City, certainly your dad is, as well as your mom. And so 20 years ago, or 5 years ago, this was a huge deal. Yeah. And because you and I were in the same fraternity, as your dad and I were in the same fraternity, I heard a lot about this. And it was, first I want to give you a ton of props for this, because, again, at the time, there was a lot of negative publicity about kids dropping out of general. Like, oh my God, you spend all this time thinking what's going to happen to my kid to go to college, and you have this idea of what's going to happen. And I will say Jake seems to be the kung fu example from our last speaker. Really bucked the trend, and I will say, as I recall, there's probably 30 or 35 pledges in the pledge class, and they were all like, Jake's nuts, there's no way he's going to make it. So the reason we have Jake here today, Jake is CEO and founder of Trendsetters, which is largely a Gen Z marketing firm, large brands that you would all know, some of which that have arches, hamburgers. Hire Jake to attract the next generation of workers. And as I look around the room, and I fall in that Gran Torino crowd now that's 50 plus and has a lot of opinions about people your age, because I have a few of them at home as well. If you don't have a good Gen Z strategy, for those of you in HR, and virtually all of you are, you're going to have a heck of a time over the next decade as the baby boomers quickly leave the employment of your businesses, and you have to attract this Gen Z cohort. I think I can say categorically it's a different enterprise. Jake is a mentor to me. Many of you know Allison Porter. Allison is a producer at Lockton as well, like I am, and she's also a mentor to me, because when you're older, you don't see things that the new generation sees. And I can tell you just from the studies we do and talking with Jake and Allison, they are looking for a different employment experience. So with that, I wanted to welcome Jake and say thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Of course. Yeah, and I think you queued up the intro great there. Something I would add to that dialogue is part of my qualification on here is not just because of the whole Gen Z thing, like that allows me to tap into insights, but as an organization, we've employed more than 100 individuals in this category over the past 5 years. And as mentioned, I'm a college dropout. I didn't go get my MBA, so I had about no clue what I was doing. And so I was able to, fortunately, make every single possible mistake in that hiring. And that's hiring here, our headquarters here in Kansas City, office out in Southern California, team actually in the Philippines, a few individuals in India. So at a global scale, have made every single mistake you can name. And I think as we look at the next decade ahead, as we've worked with more companies in the space, the very obvious thing to me is that now AI is the big thing, right? Like 2 years ago, it was 3 years ago, it was pandemic, remote work, and then it all that technology. Then it was Web3 and crypto. Now it's AI, which I'm sure is going to unleash a whole new set of economics. But the underlying trend of all those things is that the younger workforce is going to have a leg up and a step ahead to be able to integrate with those technologies and put that to work. And so the very obvious thing for me and for our organization is that the companies that can get ahead of this and start finding ways to empower this generation, they're going to outgrow their competitors. They're going to be more efficient, more effective, more innovative, obviously. And probably most importantly, they're going to build leaders that will take over their companies 10 to 20 years from now. And even if you don't care about just your particular company for whatever reason, you may end up leaving or whatever, I'm going to retire in a few years. If we look at the larger global economic footprint of this, if we collectively don't figure out a way to put this generation to work, we are talking about significant consequences. I had a call last week with the U.S. Department of Energy, an organization that we've consulted with for a couple of years now. And they told me, their chief of staff, Zach Valdez, that the number one problem we're facing right now is not the capital, obviously, they're the government, they can just print it. It's not the technology, it's not the science. We have all this stuff figured out. We do not have enough people to go out and build, the wind things, the solar things, the nuclear things that I'm not qualified to even talk about. But our biggest problem right now is people. We can't hire and find enough Gen Z individuals to go out and build this. And we're having to compete with the private market and so on. And that's their biggest gap. And so, if that's the case for them, which is also equally ironic, this is a generation most wanting to fight climate change and change the world and get ahead of this thing, yet we're not qualified nor trained up to actually go and do anything about it. And so for me, the way I look at this is the most talented generation yet. And if we don't find a way to put that to work for our companies and for proper use, we're missing out on huge opportunity.
And what would you say that are the largest impediments to that progress? What are the things that we as a cohort, maybe in Gen X and Y, are missing in terms of attracting those folks to the workforce or to your brand?
Yeah, so I think the first step is always ensuring that, is this a boardroom or leadership talking point, or is this a boardroom or leadership action? Because some of these things we like to talk about because they're fun to talk about, or it's interesting to ponder about the future and what we're going to do here. But very rarely do I see, organizations making the necessary shifts, putting it in a top 3 or a top 5 of our action list to actually bring that to life. So I think that's one thing. And then I think the second thing is connecting to younger employees at where they are and at those perspectives. My one real employment I've ever had, I was an intern at Cerner when I was in high school. And on the last day of my internship there, I finally got to meet my technical boss, which was an odd way to meet. The whole time I was just running around with someone else telling me what to do. And he brings me into his office. He's on like the 6th floor. They have like 4 or 5 offices around here that are all huge. And he's in like kind of a corner office, I guess. And he after learning more about me, he goes, Jake, I really believe in you. And my advice to you would be go to school for 4 years, spend more 2 years, go get your MBA, work really hard for about 2 decades, and one day you could have an office just like this, and and a job just like this. And while from his perspective, that might be exactly what he wanted at my age at 17 years old. Maybe it wasn't, but it's definitely what he wanted then, and it was something he was proud of. But that's when you have a family. That's when you have a mortgage to pay for. That's when you have, significant expenses. It's not like teenagers are dreaming of one day becoming a VP of a 6,000 person organization. That's not necessarily a dream. The number one thing that kids want to be at 12 years old polled is number 1 is YouTuber, number 2 is social media influencer, number 3 is actor. And by the way, historically, it's always been the 3 A's: astronaut, athlete, and actor, and it just changes on the year. JFK era, it's going to be astronaut. MJ era, it's going to be athlete. So it shifts around. But to me, I think it's about understanding at a specific perspective level.
Got it. I think about the first business interaction we had, you introduced us to a company you were working with called SnapNurse. I just actually spoke with those folks again today. And just learning a little bit about how people get paid on a daily basis versus waiting 2 weeks and how little equity that Gen Z sees in that, given the fact that you're floating a big company 2 weeks worth of money, their exposure either being a bartender or Uber. You might talk a little bit about your engagements in that category too, because I was astounded. This was a company that 3 years ago had something like $100 million in revenue. I think they just went over $1.2 billion. And this was one of the few things that they did to attract nurses to them versus other nursing staff firms on offer.
Yeah, I think their specific example highlights a level of creative solution and thinking outside of the box and really looking at forgetting what we know to be true in HR today, and then measuring it at an audience and an insights level with this generation, and then allowing yourself to then rethink about how we could potentially do things. One of the things that we've always, in conversations with individuals in HR, people strategy, you name it, is always to kind of think beyond the norms that we might be limited to in this space. There's a few underlying factors with this generation, and it's not specific, It depends on whether it's white collar, blue collar, skilled labor, service, retail. But the few underlying factors that we see, number one, entrepreneurship. 56% plan to start their own business before the age of 25. Number two, purpose. An altruistic sense of purpose, wanting to see the impact of their work in terms of creating a better world, but also purpose connecting to the bottom line. If I'm in spreadsheets all day, I want to know, how does this really affect our clients or our customers? What am I actually doing here? And then I think number three, which is to me the biggest one here, which is what we call options, the gig economy, the creator economy. Frankly, for young people today, there are more ways and easier ways to make money than ever before. You can go and make products at your house and sell them on Etsy. You can go buy stuff on Craigslist, resell on Facebook Marketplace, or vice versa. You can at all times go sign up for DoorDash or Uber or Instacart, go make a quick buck. You can pop up your own, restaurant pop up on the side and sell hot dogs outside of a game, right? Like there are infinite possibilities. And so for employers in the space, you're not just competing against that company across the street, and I think we could probably get into side hustles too, but you're competing with the opportunities to earn an income beyond just traditional ways and styles of employment.
Yeah, so Jake's very active on LinkedIn and social media. If you all haven't connected with him, please do as a result of our meeting today. He has some great content. I saw some this morning, at least the algorithm showed it to me this morning, which who knows if you probably did a week ago, but there's this TikTok that goes out, and this gentleman that gets hired at these larger organizations, and I think we're all as an organization trying to figure out how best to embrace this type of employee that would come in and have some satire about their experience.
Yeah.
And maybe talk a little bit about how enlightened employers really expand upon this and get behind the wave versus standing in front of it and getting rolled over.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that was a trend we obviously sent out to the Walmart team and the McDonald's team. A really fascinating trend on TikTok right now. Definitely worth checking out. I believe the song's called Customer Service. It's been going crazy. He's talking about, it's kind of a meme satire song talking about working at his job, and now everyone's picked up on it. Some very positive, a girl working at McDonald's being super positive with it. Some very negative, a guy working at Starbucks who looks like he doesn't want to be working at Starbucks. But one of the things that I think like tactically we've looked to design kind of a strategic framework around, and we've made it memorable. So right here, it's peace. And this is kind of our strategic framework that we've rolled out with companies in the space. So P starts with purpose and principles. Purpose, of course, being what's our mission statement, our morals, our values. Now that's great to have, but oftentimes in most organizations that only exist as like some poster on the wall that people see in the break room or like on the website. Principles are the daily action of those actually coming to life. The E there is going to be engagement and empowerment. How are we engaging our employees beyond traditional forms of engagement? Are we only speaking to them once a month or once a quarter, or in my case with my internship, at the very end of my internship there? Are we finding ways to connect with them beyond? It's amazing. We have unlimited ways to reach people today, yet we communicate with people way less, which is very strange. Beyond meetings. It's like if there's not a meeting on a calendar, we can't talk to someone. The A there, and quite obvious, is authenticity. Are we very real and candid with our employees? Oftentimes, one of the things I find interesting, and with a lot of my friends who are in entry-level jobs right now, is they have no sense of whether they are overperforming or underperforming at their job. And most often, it is the opposite, where if they think they're overperforming, they're probably actually underperforming. And if they think they're underperforming, they are actually overperforming. But they have no sense of it. And how should they know? Should I be asking for a salary right now, or should I be coming in the weekend to keep my job? And so they're kind of in this limbo. C in P stands for collaboration and culture. How do we break down the silos of our organization so our employees can connect with one another beyond, just their own department, if you will? One of my best examples of this is Sherwin-Williams. There was a kid on TikTok that had started posting really, stylistically appealing and aesthetically appeasing content of the paint mixing, and was getting millions of views on the platform, all while working inside of a Sherwin-Williams on the can. Amazing promotion, getting way more viewership than their marketing team, right? Now, instead of putting him to work, getting him in touch with the marketing team, finding some quid pro quo solution there, They decided to issue him a letter that he needed to stop or he'd be fired. Ultimately, he said, well, I'm not going to stop. So he keeps doing it. He ultimately gets fired. He starts his own paint company and does $3 million in his first year in business competing with Sherwin-Williams. Now, could they really care about $3 million in revenue? No. But were they missing out on a huge marketing opportunity? 100%. And one of the things we advise McDonald's and a lot of the employers we work with is like your employees, especially the service and retail model, they're going to be creating content on the job. It's just a matter of if you're leveraging it or not. And are they going to be creating in a positive way because you're incentivizing them to do so? Or are you going to let them badmouth you and then try to fire them when they do so? And then the final E, which really surrounds the whole thing, but peace sounds a lot better than EPAC or whatever that would be, is empathy. Are we applying empathy to everything we are doing in the HR, in the people strategy space? Are we making sure that we're reaching and connecting with a human that at the end of the day is not making, and we all know this from a marketing perspective, but it seems sometimes we forget this in the world of HR and people strategy and bureaucracy, which is people are not making logical decisions, they're making emotional decisions. And I think that's even more accelerated, more volatile with younger generations. A report came out a couple days ago that talked about how Gen Z are regularly going into debt to go on leisure travel and vacations. When you look at the most frequent Gen Z travelers, those that make more than $100,000 per year only travel for leisure more than twice per year, only 11% do. Whereas those that make less than 50 grand, AKA people who probably shouldn't be traveling as much, it's 61%. Go ahead and travel as much as they want, going into debt. So we know they're not making logical decisions in the space. It's 100% emotional. So making sure we have an empathetic backbone to everything we look to apply.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I know how much you use social media as part of your business. And I also know just by studies and speaking with you that your generation is demanding more behavioral health in terms of the employment experience and just in terms of making that a front and center topic without taboo. I know personally, just because I know you do plenty in your life to stay away from social media as well, just in terms of endurance athletics and meditation and all that you do to turn off. So maybe talk about why does you think that this generation is so interested in behavioral health and maybe utilizes it more than historically has been the case.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned before, this is a generation facing what I would call an absolute mental health epidemic. Like the rates we're seeing are quite out of control. Now, is that a result of technology? Is it accelerated by technology? Is it driven by simply awareness where when we're more aware of mental health things, we're more likely to get diagnosed for it? So it's definitely a question, but we've certainly seen a trend in recent years. I think COVID really accelerated this towards mindfulness, towards meditation. One of my really good friends, Max Gomez, runs an app called Breathwork. They're partnering with NBA now. They've grown like crazy just in the past few years. And I'm sure a lot of the employers will resonate with, maybe you've made it a thing, maybe you haven't made it a thing yet, but the whole need for a mental health day. And there's interesting science to kind of back that up for why that might be valuable. I think it's a great move by organizations, but this is a generation that I think is oftentimes hyper fixated or hyper aware, and sometimes maybe overly on the thoughts that are going inside their head. And a lot of that's driven because when you grow up in a social media era, some of the things that you avoid having not grown up in that era, you simply can't avoid. And I know the classic adage, okay, just put the phone down, but that's not a realistic solution. You grow up in middle school, you now know when your friends are hanging out without you. You know when you're not invited to that party. When people post to social media, they're not posting when they're not having a great day. They're only posting when they're going out and having fun. And so I think it creates this kind of cascading effect that exists both consciously and I think more so even subconsciously. And now I think it's becoming a problem for employers when you have, even the whole salary transparency thing. This generation is so transparent with their salaries. So when their friends are all talking about how they make $72K a year and you make $60K a year, you might love your job, but you're pissed that you have to sit there at dinner and tell your friends that you make $60K a year and then they're probably going to joke with you and say, oh, okay, well, next drink's on me then, and give you shit for it. So that's just the reality. And so I think those are some of the driving forces, and I think it's going to become more and more of a problem for employers to have to kind of navigate those mental health waters.
Yeah, and so when you start an engagement with an employer, large employer, generally what are you tracking as KPIs? I mean, how do you know you're making progress? And I guess to back up even a step, how do you know you have somebody in front of you that's ready for change?
Yeah, so I think the first step is ensuring that leadership, the board, the CEO, that she's on board with that thing. You have to have full buy-in at that level, and if you don't, it's going to go nowhere. So I think that's step one. And then, to me, step two of it is every organization is going to be different, but it's designing the proper framework. I'm sure McKinsey, Deloitte, others that work in the space are going to have much better models than what we'll have at Trendsetters, just a little peace sign emoji. But it's making sure you have the right framework for implementation. And then once you have that in place, that needs to be a shift that happens now, not something that takes place over a 24 or 36-month period. If COVID already hasn't changed our mindset on that, planning anything beyond 3 to 6 months with a generation operating at this level of volatility seems a little bit, not the best way to do things. So I think it's about rapid implementation and getting ahead of these trends, because for all we know, everything I'm saying today about Gen Z could be completely opposite just 2 years from now. I think there's that much volatility, not just there's volatility with any young generation. That's just historically the case. 18-year-olds will and forever will always be the most volatile of any age cohort. But I think volatility with this generation is accelerated because of the ease of technology to enable it, if you will.
Yeah, and maybe say a word or two about transparency. I remember a few years back when somebody introduced me to the Glassdoor app, and just the horror I had on my face as you read about your company, your competitors, and all of this. And it is my sense that your generation, well, I'll let you opine, but I mean, transparency is something that's coming like rolling thunder, and not embracing it is probably perilous. Yeah,
so the way we define it internally as a company is radical transparency, asterisk, driven by empathy. And Derek B. Wright, our only non-Gen Z member, Gen X, he's kind of helped us coin that, because he's realized that to be the case as he's entered our work environment. He was chief of staff with Marcelo when Marcelo Clade was running Sprint and SoftBank as COO there. So a little bit different environment than Gen Z. Billionaire is going to be a little bit more to the point, real, as opposed to a Gen Z environment. But for us, it's about making sure that at all times, all of the members on our team and some of the employers that we work with, they need to know where they stand. And we need to avoid those issues where they simply don't know if they're doing a good job or not. They don't know if they should be improving. They don't have a sense of this. They're probably not picking up on those subtle signs that you're maybe trying to read. And most importantly, they don't know what's going on in your head when you're, managing that individual. Some of the norms and practices of work culture that likely they've missed out on because they haven't been in a formal environment for quite some time, they might make a misstep there. And so I think it's really important that organizations find ways to, still with empathy, you need to drive it, but being very transparent with your team members. Hey, this is the forecast for what we're going to be doing. These are the new roles we're going to be looking for. This is our new expectation. This is our expectation for you in this role. And communicating that beyond just some paperwork that is probably never, or a memo or an email that's never going to actually be read.
Yeah, so we use Workplace at Lockton. I think Yammer, there's a number of different applications out there that corporations use for purposes of communication, and it's interesting that a few of us belong to a large healthcare group. We're actually meeting next week, and one of the more progressive CHROs told a story about, they call it Yammergate, where they started with Yammer. They had a couple things come up. I think it was an acquisition of some of their pharmacies that they had sold to CVS, and that they had made positive statements about what they're going to do with their pharmacists, and I think there were 120, 130 people affected. And then somebody got on Yammer and said, hey, whatever became of these 120, 130 people that were displaced? And her impulse was to jump in and really defend the organization, and she was gratified to report that that the employees had figured it out, right? It was like, hey, well, actually, 130, there were 130 displaced, 121 were hired by CBS, others, found other employee. Maybe speak a little bit about what is the best methodology to not only create a process like that, but how do you weigh in or leave it alone just in terms of measuring the level of transparency and trust within the organization? Is it a good barometer?
Yeah. I think some of these digital communication tools, and for us, we're working with a team in the Philippines and another country that I've never met any of these individuals personally before at all, and it's an issue we run into where our U.S. team members might treat someone like crap over there, or vice versa, right? Because there's no physical connection, and we even noticed that with, we have a headquarters here in Kansas City. We also have a team out in SoCal. They can feel very disconnected when we're only communicating through Zoom calls or Google Meets or Slack all day, and you kind of lose that personal touch. So, for us, our rule is always, if it is a legitimate conversation that needs to be had, it's not something we're going to handle inside of a digital communication structure. And if you're, in another country, we're going to jump on a call and we're going to talk that through, and we're going to have our video cameras on. I can't stand that we're like 3 years into this thing and people will still join a call and not have their video camera on. I get it if you're having a bad hair day. Like, trust me, now I get it. But there's no excuse anymore. So, for us, that's always the rule. And when it comes to, a reaction cadence, I think it's making sure that we don't overreact to things or overdraw them out. And, ideally you have an organization where other team members beyond just management and leaders will go ahead and address that in some way. And that's what I always love seeing inside of our company, when someone will be freaking out about something, and then someone else, not me, will come in and be like, hey, chill out, here's where we're at with it, it's all good. That's an awesome moment.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we opened the bar for good reason. We were hoping to create some creativity and some vulnerability here, so I've been monopolizing Jake's time. Hopefully some of you in the audience here have a question or two for Jake before we adjourn. Anyone? Yeah, please.
So with this new generation coming in, we're in healthcare, 24/7, 365. What I'm running into is not compensation, it's that work-life balance. How do you get this new generation, because it's not just your generation, but from this new generation, how do you track them into a business like healthcare that you need people at the bedside?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, if the main concern is for those individuals work-life balance, I think the first thing I would do is go find employees in the organization right now who have an awesome work-life balance. If you need help finding it, just look them up on Facebook. They probably have an Instagram page. You see them traveling a lot. You're like, all right, you'd be a good person to highlight. I'm sure if you send a memo out too, you get some people to reply. So first, highlighting some individuals. Hopefully there's some, because we want to be real with people too. And I think that's one lane. And then I think the second thing is, if that is the number one concern for them, having that work-life balance, I think it's getting creative with what are ways we could structure employment to be able to meet that. And also, what does work-life balance mean? I think the era of 40-hour work week, 9 to 5, I don't know specifically what that looks like in healthcare. I know it can be quite intense. I think that era is over. For example, one of the things we've structured with our Philippines team, exactly 12 hours behind us, we started having several individuals work on the weekend because they would rather work for Friday, Saturday, Sunday for about 8 to 12 hours per day and then take the entire rest of the week off. Why do they want to do that? Because they have family in upstate of the Philippines on this separate island that they would like to visit and go hang out with during the week. And that's one example, but I think finding more creative solutions and really double-clicking, okay, what do you mean by work-life balance? Because for some people that means, hey, I want to get home a little bit earlier, I want to be able to hang out with the kids, I want to be able to do this. For some people it means I want to be able to go to Vegas for a weekend with my girls, or whatever it may be. So I think getting just a little bit creative and out of the box with how do you attack and create an environment that allows for that balance.
Yeah, I think what we've seen in healthcare too is just some dexterity in scheduling, right? So discretionary effort is different by the week based on somebody wanting to pick up an extra shift. They'd rather do that for pay and just professionally than Uber. But if the system doesn't have the versatility in how they schedule things, or if they haven't given people
go out there and get after it. You know, in the same breath, though, I would say that this is the first generation in United States history that will face worse long-term prospects than their parents. And so for everything I said, on the potential negative of it, and maybe, we need to connect more into our ancestral roots as men and go after there and kill the lion and, spear some fish, right? As much as maybe that's the case, I also think if you look at the actual onset for what are they supposed to tactically do, they were told from a very young age to sit in class and be quiet. And if they weren't quiet and they were rambunctious, like all kids will do, like any animal will do if you put them in that environment, right? Then we pumped them full of medication to solve that problem, like 25% or something like that. And then they grew up and we told them, hey, make sure you get good grades and act uniform and proper. And hey, we're not going to let you go out and run around outside. You're going to get kidnapped and killed. Stay inside, play video games, whatever. Do the sports, but only organized. Then we told them, hey, make sure you go to school, get good grades, get a degree, and go get a corporate job. And that was the KPI, not just from their potential parents or whoever they grew up with, but their family around that. And then more importantly, the school system. High schools are incentivized based on what percentage of kids graduate and then go off to a 4-year university. And so we created all that environment, and we're essentially telling them, stay box in this cage, box in this cage, box in this cage, get good grades, then go get a job instead of a corporate office or work inside of a cubicle. And then we're surprised when that doesn't work or they don't want to do that. And they find themselves very lost. And so I think we have a generation of, particularly, I would say Gen Z overall, but particularly on the male side of things, that are very lost right now. And for us, we're thinking a lot about, in the skilled labor industry, the average age of a welder is 57 years old. There's a huge problem right now in that industry. Perhaps this generation that was told to go do this and work at a computer all day, maybe that's not what we should have been telling them. Maybe 25, 33% of those individuals would be much happier and nowadays make more money if they were working with their hands and they were doing things and they were building things. And that's something I've even seen with my younger brother who had worked with us for a little bit. Like in our business, everything's digital. You can't connect to it. When there's a stressful problem, there's nothing to look at, point at. Like you can't solve it with your hands. And he's very artistic and creative, likes doing those things, like Minecraft, And so, for him, he needs to be in a position where he can see the result of what we're doing. Because for us, we literally get hired by companies, create deck presentations, do work. It all exists only online, and then there's a number on a screen, and then they buy a product, and then a dollar sign goes up and to the right, ideally, if we're doing our job right. Like, none of it's really tangible or real. So it's a very long-winded answer, but those would be my 2 perspectives on it.
Do you think they could be burnt out?
Perhaps, I don't even know if... I don't even know if burnt out is the right word, or if it's they're not putting their energy or focus, or they're not putting it into the right thing. Like what I always tell, I get questions all the time from people who want to do the same thing I did, drop out of school, start a business, whatever. And I explain to them, like, if you do not absolutely love doing that, do not do that. Because it is, from a logical perspective, it is an awful idea. And if you don't absolutely love it, you will not put in that extra effort to go after it and chase it. So I don't know if it's being burnt out as much as it's, uninspired or not putting, I think it's less inspiration. It's more, if you're not doing something you really love doing, then you're always going to burn out with that thing. Whereas if it's something you love, you're probably not going to burn out.
So I hear you saying that, they were told there's one way to succeed.
Yeah.
And that way doesn't fit everybody.
Yeah.
So because they don't fit into that one way, then there's this perception, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so I do nothing. The question I have for you, I am a person who's not really keen on stereotypes.
Yeah.
I grew up in a generation where women were told the way they could succeed. I remember my guidance counselor told me I could be a secretary or a nurse or a
So I'm not keen on the stereotypes, whether that's millennials or Gen Z or Gen X or, I do think personally that we see a dichotomy from older workers and young workers.
Yeah.
And I think that has existed since the beginning of time. You can read quotes from Plato and Aristotle, and they talk about quotes about this young generation.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And, I remember, when my brother wanted to grow his hair long, my dad was mortified, right? Look at this young generation. They made him cut his hair. He wore a bag over his head for 3 days, right? So, tell me how this is different, really. How are we dealing with anything different than the age-old, older workers view things a certain way, young people coming into the workforce view it differently? Are we really in that different of a time?
I would say very accurate, and it's something we cite all the time. As much as we are in our business as literally a Gen Z agency, I'm personally a huge believer that all history, it doesn't directly repeat, but it definitely rhymes. I will say about the unique circumstances that we find today is maybe the best example would be, okay, if then we were fighting with swords, the difference is now those generations are fighting with nuclear weapons or whatever the equivalent would be, right? Because you have, on the older side, you have individuals working to ages that we haven't seen before. They continue to work at older and older and older and older ages, and they're maintaining leadership positions inside of these companies beyond that 65 age that it's always been, right? And so I think that's one thing, the gap's a little bit wider. The other thing is I think the acceleration in terms of change. So the difference between Gen Z versus what any youth generation would be is that they've only existed in a time 1995 through through now, right? That has changed drastically. I'm a big believer in Moore's law. I don't think things accelerate quite at that rate, but our acceleration of change is much higher today than it was yesterday, and tomorrow it will be higher than it is literally today. And that'll probably always be the case. And so I think because of that acceleration of change, that gap is also a little bit wider. And then I think there's some other circumstances, but I would say that's the main difference between this era as opposed to historically.
Yeah, back to Denise's original question, the kids in basements, males in basements. Scott Galloway, Professor Scott Galloway from NYU has great data and writing and research on this topic. And again, your hesitance to get into this directly, I have the same trepidation because it's a ticklish subject. But the fact is, the way men and women get together today and is not how it happened 20, 30 years ago. My wife and I met at a Grateful Dead concert. That's not happening anymore, right? I mean, normally you're going online, you're going on an app, there's swiping that happens, and frankly, the newer apps generally put us in a cohort in charge of that, and the algorithm determines your ability to pair, and it's just not as equal as it once was. And so if the attention goes to a certain cohort of males, the balance of them get ignored, and what normally drew someone out of the basement was a partner. That's not happening. It's just not happening at the same frequency because the algorithm is not spreading it out like it used to. So that's got to change. It has to change. But what it really does, again, just speaking to society and what it makes as a male cohort that's growing up right now, is you have a bunch of folks that are pretty lonely living in basements. And history does, if we're rhyming, that's not a good thing for society. You have things like violence. Some of the gun violence you see, it's often associated with that profile, and it's scary. Yes?
So I've got a question, Jake. You talked about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So as an employer, what are some of the things that we should be doing to support our Gen Zs? So I hear about mental health in interviews. Of course, I hear about it during the workday. I applaud the generation for just being able to talk about it and normalize it. But as an employer, what are some things that we should be doing to support our Gen Zs? What programs should we put in place?
Yeah. So, this is something we work on quite a bit. We obviously do internally. It means a lot to us. Also means a ton to me personally. A couple of the things, I think we'll get to the point where there's going to be legitimate technological solutions for this. One of the companies we're advising here in town actually They're working on building an AI platform that's going to integrate into all communication streams inside of an organization so we can get true reads on individuals that might be going through something. And it doesn't have to be, potential suicide prevention. It could be a simple, they're stressed out this week. That's really important for an employer to understand. I think number one, it's access to resources is one thing, although access only matters if there's the knowledge and the constant reminder of those resources. I'm sure a lot of the employers in here have incredible resources. Do your entry-level younger employees actually know about them? Or were they not paying attention to that part of the briefing at the beginning of the year, which is likely the case. So I think that's one front. The other is, I think, a hyper-awareness from management and leaders inside of the company, and all the individuals. Like our high school principal used to tell us in a country accent, he would say, "See something, say something." And so, if you're aware, if you see something going on, or notice something in a conversation with someone, it's being willing and being kind of hyper-aware to pull them away and have that conversation. And then I think there's more simple tactical things that, from a productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness standpoint, are really big wins. So something we do at our organization, once every 90 days, you have to take a mental health day. You don't have to take one only if you need one. You have to take one. And because we set it up in that way, and that was really designed. One of our female team members, we just knew, and she had a conversation about it, that if it was optional, she was never going to take one, because when all the other guys are in the office, she doesn't want to be the one out. She wants to make sure, no, I'm just as strong-minded as all the guys in here, right? And so when we switched it and made it 100% mandatory once every 90 days, once a quarter, then it became a lot more frequent and people are a lot more comfortable with it. So I think there's tactical things like that are helpful. But I think the biggest thing is just creating hyper-awareness inside the organization, and making sure we have those resources inside. And then I hope one day there's a much grander technological solution, but I don't think we're there yet.
Do you take the mental health day every 90 days?
Oh, yeah.
So I heard
It's on Saturday, but I take it.
I heard you talking earlier, and I made the comment, I feel like you've been in my house for like the last 6 months, and if this doesn't work out, you're going to be our new family therapist.
Yes.
I do believe you could be a good bridge to my twin 16-year-old boys. I'm curious, for having a son that is kind of in the basement, and we're trying to encourage to get out. And again, 16, so it's a little younger.
Yeah.
Are there podcasts or books that you like, that you even recommend to some of your friends or your fellow employees?
Yeah, so Caleb in the back knows he gets 10 books a month on his door. That's a big thing. I'm a huge reader. But, I think it comes down to reverse engineer what he likes. So at that age, most popular influencer for that age demographic is Mr. Beast. And so if he likes watching
I'm
Mr.
still trying to figure out what in the F that is. I'm literally about to just hire you.
Which is amazing, by the way, because the dude's production budget is like $3 to $5 million per. He's incredible at what he does. Like, he is his own production studio. He'll outlast Lionsgate and all those others. But for instance, if he was into Mr. Beast, then I would reverse engineer. And Mr. Beast has been on a podcast by Colin and Samir where they interview content creators. And, so it's not them creating, but it's them talking about what's the process of making that happen and come to life. And so I think you can find niches like that where you're interested in it from a consumer perspective. Let's look at it from a back end. And then I think it's just one of the beauties of the era we live in. The downside of digital and social is the constant bombardment. So we never take a second to process. One of the exercises I love doing personally, if I find myself scrolling on social media, is stopping for a second and asking myself, do I remember anything I just watched? And the answer is usually no. If when that's the case, taking a second to slow down, double click into the interesting things and let yourself run down that rabbit hole, which is the beauty of digital and social. And so if you're super into Frisbee golf, this is my favorite example. If you were super into Frisbee golf in high school in the 80s and you were 16 years old, There's not probably a nationally published Frisbee golf newsletter, right? There's not a Frisbee golf channel on one of the, you guys had more than 3 channels in the 80s, right?
Maybe 6.
15. Anyway. So there wasn't a channel, you know. There probably wasn't a club at school. And so your potential ability to immerse yourself in that hobby was limited geographically and physically. Your friends all play football. They don't want to play Frisbee golf with you. Who cares, right? You now live in an era where if you are interested in some interesting, quirky thing like Frisbee golf or whatever you name it, right? You now live in an era where there is undoubtedly 900 YouTube channels that are about Frisbee golf. And there are Instagram pages and TikTok pages and Reddit threads about how to throw it better with higher velocity and how to angle it and curve it this way, right? And how to do all those things. And there's a Facebook group that'll tell you all the local tournaments coming up. And oh, there's a huge national tournament happening down in Wichita. I can go to that. And so that's one example of a physical activity, but that's the case for anything.
The Frisbee golf tournament in Wichita is probably not the best way to get up.
No. I wouldn't recommend that one specifically.
I like that reverse engineering thing, like go deep on how they got to where they got to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd recommend David Goggins. I don't know if for young males out there, I did this thought experiment with my son when he was down in the basement playing video games with his friends too much, and I just said, you need to read this book, Can't Hurt Me. And then after you read this, we'll talk about your video game habits or whatever, and it kind of self-resolved. So he's not the easiest gentleman to listen to, but sometimes you need a shock to the system. So got our last speaker went about 15 minutes fast, and we're about 15 minutes over. So I want to make sure everybody's got a chance to go upstairs, freshen up, and head over to dinner. We're going to be there at 5:30 for cocktails and 6 o'clock for dinner. Just a reminder for tomorrow, we are starting breakfast at 7:30. It'll conclude at 8:30. I guess we'll get started with Evie at about 8:45 and move on from there. But since we're short on time, we'll hustle to dinner. And talk to Carrie if anybody needs a ride over. We're about 2 blocks. I think we have a map in your program, so you can walk over. A bunch of us will be walking over. But if anyone needs a ride for whatever reason, we'll have a car or 2 going over. Yeah, we'll leave at 5:25. It's 5 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jake.
Oh, yeah.
Jake is coming to dinner and also very available. Again, LinkedIn, reach out to him.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
We do okay?
Yeah, I did.
Perfect. Awesome.
I think you're going to be paradise dinner for all sorts of parents.
I'm ready for it.
Perfect.
Coming back next year?
If you'd like me back,
Thanks so much.
Tonight. You can come to dinner so we can
All of us parents, we need him in all of our conversations.
Thank you so much for that
Great
question,
conversation.
too.